Welcome to another Imagenomic video tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to show you how to use Noiseware Pro Plugin inside of Photoshop CS5. At present, Imagenomic supports CS3, CS4, and CS5, as well as Elements 6, 7, and 8 with Noiseware. Imagenomic has plans for Lightroom as well as Aperture versions of the plugin. The image modes supported are Grayscale, RGB, and Lab Color in either 8 or 16-bit channels. The filter itself is run from the Filter, Imagenomic, Noiseware. I'm going to give you a run through of the various slider settings and other aspects of the Noiseware Pro dialog. To start with, we're going to come up to the settings, and as you can see, it shows that there's a custom preset in there, Hershey 1, which I made for this image ahead of time. If we click the arrow that brings down the drop-down list box, from the default all the way down to the full weaker noise, these are built-in canned presets. In other words, they're hard-coded into the program and you can't delete them. All of the custom presets, which allows up to 40, you can go in and create your own set of slider settings in here. Click on the small icon right here or press Control S, and the Save Custom Filter Settings dialog will pop up. You would give it a name. We'll just say Test 4. Always check the Include Profile with Filter Settings. We click OK, and now you notice up here it changed to C4 Test 4. If we click the arrow, drop down the box, we now have that Test 4 in there. The purpose of this is you can save whatever settings you want, come back to them at a later date and use them. You can also delete a preset. This is what this does here. If we click on Delete Custom Preset, it'll ask me if I want to delete Test 4, which is the name of the preset up here. If I click yes, it'll delete it. For the purpose of here, we're just going to click no. We also have undo and redo, basically the same that's going on inside of Photoshop. If we go along and make some slider changes and then we back them up, you'll notice now that this arrow becomes active, and that's the redo. So we can go forward and back within our history itself just by clicking these arrows, or either using the hotkeys Control Z for undo and Control Y for redo. As with any program that's slider based, the easiest way of dealing with trying to get settings set to a certain place is start with a default. We've got a default setting here in Noiseware that overall gives a pretty decent average of noise reduction. You can see here's a before, and you notice a little speckly salt and pepper, which is a luminance noise in there. We got some color noise floating around in some of the banding areas and the shadows and all. Here's after. And so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of look at some of these areas that it didn't really get some of the luminance noise out, especially in this image here, because in the background there's actually a lot of lights, and some of these little places here are actually lights that are reflecting off. We got some specular stuff in the background. So if we really want to kind of knock some of that down, what we can do is we could go up to the noise level slider, which noise level is just telling you the amount of noise in an image that we want to deal with. So if we want to use all of the luminance noise and work with all of it, what we do is we just move that slider up to max. And you see it started coming down a little bit there. I'm going to show you what you can do to learn how to really use the software. Just max out from default settings. We go all the way back out to minus 20, which is no noise level in the luminance. And then we go about halfway, and we see it's getting quite a bit of noise out of there, and then we bump it up all the way. Okay? And then we can see there's still a little bit in there. That's because we have the noise reduction, which is the amount of luminance that we're going to take out. We've got it set at 70. As we start moving it up, you'll see these little areas will start disappearing in there. And if we keep on going all the way up, we'll just almost totally get rid of them. We'll go into a little bit later on some of the areas about how to get rid of everything there. But for the sake of using these sliders right here, noise level is the amount of noise in an image. In this case, the amount of luminance or the amount of color. Noise reduction is how much of the noise level you want to take out of an image, both in luminance and in color. Now we're going to go down and we're going to get into these various tabs here. The detail, which deals with detail protection and the enhancement of the image itself. We've got the frequency tab, which allows you to adjust various frequency parameters. We've got tonal range in there, which works with the actual like midtones, highlights, and shadows of an image. And then we have color range, which works with the various color hues in the image itself. So to start with, we're going to get down here into the detail protection. And what detail protection does is that when you have a noisy image and you start trying to get rid of some of the noise in the image, just the inherent nature of the beast of the noise reduction is you're going to lose some of the detail of an image. And a lot of times it's not so much losing detail of an image, it's just what you perceive as noise and what you perceive as detail. And when you have a lot of this fine grainy look in an image that goes in something like this right here, when you start taking stuff out, you're going to have things that are going to kind of come in, and it's going to look like it's either mud or it's going to look like it's some kind of blotchy areas or something. But in all reality, if you try to analyze this image and say, where's the detail in this image right here? Over here, I know I shot the image. There's a stack over here that goes up the side of the building, just a long stack. We've got some lights over in the background from some of the other buildings back there, and these are lights in here. And then some of this stuff is actually little small speculars, and you'll notice some of them are actually bigger than others. So as we go in and we say, well, how much of this stuff do we want to actually get out and how much do we want to leave in? That's where the detail protection parameters come in. As you can see, I'm moving the sliders back and forth here and show you how these things can change as we move them and how they can come in and out. You go down here on the noise reduction and you'll see it starting to come back in a little bit at a time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a preset here that I've already made for this one called Hershey 1, because this is the Hershey building up there on Broadway. We're going to click on Hershey 1, and we've got a nice overall kind of even look to it. And again, we're at 100% here. If we back this image out to around 50% and we try to look at it in here, it's going to look like there's a little bit of the salt and pepper and stuff laying in there and all. Sometimes you want to leave a little bit of that in there because it gives it a kind of a textured look to it. If you remove too much of the noise in an image, sometimes you can over process it and then you lose a lot of the real detail. If you're looking at this image now, say at like 50%, we were to print it at this size, say it'd be like 11 by 17, it'd be pretty acceptable, especially if you're printing on some type of fine art or canvas paper that has a tendency to hide some of that glaring stuff that gloss will show out in there. So overall, you don't want to get too carried away with your settings and try to remove every tiny little speck in there. It'll just go crazy trying to do that. So what the detail protection does here, we'll zoom into an area that's got some detail, like down in here in this swoops area where we can see from Hershey's down in here like this. If we start moving them up, I'm going to max it out again using that same paradigm, maxing out. We'll notice in the areas, some of the areas look like it kind of got a little bit more contrasty. And basically that's what it's doing. It's sort of similar to the reverse USM unsharp mask that you can use in Photoshop, where you go opposite ways with your amount and radius in there. Generally, you want to keep it down on most images. You want to keep it down into, say, like the 10 to 5 to 10 range in there, so along in there like that. You don't want to get too carried away with it. Content of the images, what type of image, how much line frequencies you have in there, the whole 9 yards is going to make a lot of difference. But generally, 5 to 10 is going to be a pretty good place to keep it at. Color, basically the same way. Color is going to look at color edges. If I bring it all the way up, it's really hard to tell there's been a lot of change in there because it'll be showing these little edges around here. And if I start zooming in past 100% on the image, it's going to really kind of mess up the whole paradigm of what we're trying to show you. But generally, on a real noisy image, you're not going to have a whole lot of detail protection that you're going to be dealing with color. Most of it's going to be in the luminance areas because that's the areas that's really showing the contrasting of the edges and so forth. So generally, same rules applies. Anywhere from like 5 to 10 is a good place to keep it at. The detail enhancement itself, we're getting into sharpening here. And sharpening is, again, it's sort of similar to the way Photoshop does. In some cases, it's actually better than anything that Photoshop has based on what type of image content you have, because it looks at the edges quite a bit different than the way Photoshop does because of the technology involved in it. But we're going to just bump it all the way up, and you see you get some edge contrasting going on there, but without the really nasty haloing and everything that you see in most types of sharpening. And it doesn't go overboard. That's one of the things with any of the sliders in this section here. When you max something out, you're not going to get this unbelievable too much amount that you don't really have any use for. So we kind of go up into a point where it starts looking a little bit edgy, and then again, you can always back it down according to your image content. We'll turn it all the way off, and you'll see the edges, especially if you watch the edges around this cup here. Just keep your eye on that as I move the slider all the way up. And you see those edges start coming in there. So in this case, maybe you want to back it down to, say, again, in that range of about 5 to 10, usually works pretty good. The contrast itself is kind of contrasting the detail areas in there, and we do the same thing. We bump it all the way down, and then I'm going to max it out and watch the edge of the cup here. It's a good place to watch, kind of a curved area there. We max it all the way out, and then again you see the edges start contrasting even more. And if we get too much of a contrast in there, again, it can kind of destroy the look of the image. So right around that 5 to 10 range is usually a pretty good area for that. Sometimes you want to go overboard with it because you're trying to work with some cool effects and all that. So that's one of the reasons that you kind of go overboard with some of these settings. Now we go down to the edge smoothing here, and we have 4 different areas. We have auto, high, normal, and low. And what that does is it looks at the edges of the image. So just say like this area here of this green neon around this icebreaker sign here. It looks at the edges there, and it determines based on the size of the image how much contrasting you have, how much noise reduction is going on in here. It tries to determine what's the best edge smoothing algorithm that'll work with that particular image overall. And here it's not any rule of thumb on this. If we go to high and we look at it, we don't see a whole lot going on in there right now because the edges and we see a little bit of a change in contrast there with the smoothing. And we go down into low, and again we see a tiny little bit of change, especially if you look into some areas here where we've got some edge detail, fine edge detail, like on the edges of these beams and all here. If we go from low to high, we see some little contrast changes going on there. Again, it's something to experiment with it. It's all image content dependent, but generally, if you keep these sliders on detail protection down, luminance and color down in the 5 to 10, and also the sharpening down in the 5 to 10, and on your edge smoothing, that's a matter of taste. Normally, most people keep it on auto and are perfectly happy with it. The next section we're going to deal with will be the frequency tab. And in the frequency tab here, because I've got this set up quite high here for this Hershey, in the default settings, they're going to zero out, and then the noise reduction is going to be maxed out to 100%. And what the frequency level is dealing with here is Imagenomic has basically divided noise levels up into 4 frequencies here: high, mid, low, and very low. The algorithms that are involved there, of course, they're being proprietary and all that, doesn't necessarily equate out to what some people may have learned in school or what the ipso de facto standard is in Photoshop or any other program there. It's basically what Imagenomic determines to be high, mid, low, and very low frequencies. Overall, it works the same way as the noise level and the noise reduction. In other words, we're telling it here on the noise level, we want to look at all of the high frequency levels that we possibly can. So if we max that out, that means that the algorithm is looking at all high frequency noise levels, and it's going to work, and it's going to apply 100% noise reduction to that frequency. Same thing here, same paradigm in the noise level and noise reduction. Same thing with mid, same thing with low, and same thing with very low. So what I normally do is when you're trying to teach how these things work, take them all the way down as far as noise level. Now leave your noise reduction all the way up. That way when we start moving noise level up here, we're going to see what's being affected. So if I take and start out with high frequency, rule of thumb is max it out to start with and then see what affects in the image. And you'll notice in the image that little fine salt and pepper look, especially over in this area, disappeared. Again, we're going to go all the way down. You see it come back in there, the real fine salt and pepper. And then we go all the way up. Now we're going to leave that where it is right there because we want to be able to see the next level, which is the mid frequencies. We're going to see what happens here. Again, we're going to take that booger all the way up, and we saw some changes going on in there. You watch them now, all the way down. And you notice here it looks much finer detail when we go up to mid frequencies. Now if I was to take the high frequency off, it would kind of confuse you because you're going to see the high frequency noise level coming in there. So remember, just walk down there, max it out, go to the next one, max it out, and kind of get an idea about what's happening in there. Now on the low frequencies, we're going to do the same thing. And then you even notice in this area here, all of a sudden you see it start to get much cleaner and everything starts to kind of come together. If we'd have left these guys off up here, we'd have had a difficult time determining what's going on with low frequency. In fact, we have a lot of customers say, I moved that low frequency all the way up, nothing happened there. It's because it's being masked by the mid frequency and high frequency because they're all turned all the way down. So you got to remember that. As you walk down the sliders, you got to walk down them. And you notice this here on the low frequency, all the way off. You see the kind of splotchy, blurry look that's going on. When we bring that in and get the reduction going properly on there, it cleans up and it looks more natural. Next thing, go down to the very low. We're going to max that booger out. And you'll see again some of the contrast levels changing here. And you can see how the image is starting to come together now. Everything starts looking a whole lot cleaner and all. We've got this thing maxed out all the way. So if we go back to the very top, we take off high frequency. We see all that salt and pepper come back. We take off mid frequency. We see kind of a little brightness and contrast come back up in there, which is actually the noise of the low mid frequency. The low is really difficult to see any kind of change there because it's being masked by the other two. And then the very low is you really can't see anything because they're being masked up here. That's why when you're learning the software, you start at the highest frequency and you work your way down. Okay. Same thing down here. If we want to just back off the amount of high frequency noise level being done, we just start moving it down, and you'll watch the little start coming back in here. Just a little bit at a time. As we start moving the rest of the sliders down, you'll see it even come back even more. Keep going. And there we go. Okay? So, in a nutshell, you want to be able to understand that it's not that important to know what a frequency is. You just know and understand your image and how these sliders can apply to it. You know that if you start taking off this high frequency with the noise reduction maxed out, you're going to start seeing some salt and pepper come back in there. If you start taking out the mid frequencies in it, you're going to start seeing kind of a little edgy contrast, a little blotchy look come back into it. If you start taking out the low frequency, you're going to see even more blotchy. It looks more like it's spread out over the image more. You see it in these little contrasty, more or less flat areas like this, and like around the edge of this image right here. And you notice when I move it back, you'll see them disappear. And then when you take out the very low, it's going to be a bigger area. It's more like a wider area of contrast, because the lower the frequency, the bigger the area that's being affected by the controls. We're going to go into the tonal range tab now. The tonal range tab has the same paradigm as the frequency and also the main noise level and noise reduction sliders, in that instead of dividing it up into frequencies, we're just dividing it up into shadows, midtones, and highlights. So if we want to turn off the noise reduction in the shadows, we can just go here and move it, and you see immediately the noise comes back in there. If we want to work on the midtones, again, same thing. We see noise coming back into the image. And then on highlights, in this image here, really in the highlights, there's not any noise going on, so that'd be irrelevant on that. So again, it works the same way. We've got the amount of noise in the shadows, midtones, and highlights, and we have the amount of noise reduction that you're going to do in shadows, midtones, and highlights. We're going to now move on to the color range tab, which is the last tab in the tabbed area on the dialog. And this is, we divided it up, and again, there's noise level and noise reduction. And remember, noise level is the amount of noise in an image, and noise reduction is how much reduction is being done to that level. We have reds, yellows, greens, cyans, blue, magentas, and neutrals here. I'm going to slide the old neutral back here, or you can just double click on any pointer in any Imagenomic plugin and it'll automatically zero out. So we've got, basically, we're telling it that it's going to make an average of what the reds is in there. It's not going to work on the reds any more than any other color. It's going to average all the colors out and work on them all the same. If I tell it to work on reds more than any other color, I just slide the noise level over in the reds, and it's going to look around and find what it considers to be reds, and then it's going to work more on them. You'll see in here as I back it off all the way down, you'll see in these areas you kind of notice a little blippy change in here, because we kind of have a mixture of, it's almost like red and yellow, which is orange there. So if I bump the yellows down some, you'll see that you get a little bit of a change coming in there. It's really hard to see what's going on there. But if I come down and bump down the noise reduction slider itself all the way down, you'll immediately notice in those orange and red areas in there, immediately notice a bunch of noise come back into them. So in a nutshell, these sliders work exactly the same way as they did in the tonal range and the frequency, in that the sliders and the noise level determine how much noise is being worked on in a particular color. And the neutrals is just overall looking at the gray balance of the image and working on that. So if you select a color that you have in your image and you want to just knock a lot of noise out of it, especially if you're dealing with skies, which is a real big thing to have noise in, you could just select the cyans or blues and then bump up your color adjustments here as far as reduction, and take everything else and just slide them down. And that's one of the reasons that the color range selector is in there. Once again, it works the same way though. Noise level is the amount of noise in a particular color range, and noise reduction is the amount of noise being reduced We're now going to move on to the right-hand side of the Noiseware dialog. You have your standard OK button, which completes your settings and sends it back out to Photoshop. You've got your cancel button, which just cancels and doesn't save anything. And on the PC, if you press the Alt key, it'll change to reset. On the Mac, you use the Command key. And what that does is resets the settings to what they were when you came into the plugin. The Help button will bring up the standard Noiseware Help PDF, and the About button itself will bring up the About screen that tells who it's registered to, and it'll show your product ID, and you can also check for updates there. In the preview mode, you have a fast preview and an accurate. In most cases, on slower machines, that's one of the reasons it's there. If you have a slower system in there, maybe like just say an older system, it's got like 4 gig or maybe even 2 gig of RAM, and you've got say a 1.2 or 1.8 gig Core 2 Duo or even a single core processor, you want to go to the fast preview because it'll build the previews a whole lot faster. If you've got a machine within the last couple of years, maybe even 2.5 years, the accurate is where you want to go with it, as it'll give you a little bit more accurate pixel level designation of what's being done within the Noiseware preview window. The navigator, we mentioned before, just the red box, grab it, drag it around, moves it around the image. And down here in the profile, we didn't go into the manual profiling for the simple fact it's rather complex, and it's getting into the longness of this video here. So in profile, you're better off leaving it just on automatic. And this graph down here really just gives you an idea about what noise levels are in each of the frequencies themselves. Most people, it doesn't really matter what they are. It's just there for the people that really want to kind of get an idea about how their images are being captured and the various editing parameters are using in their saying, especially in raw conversion. And then the self-learning, again, this is something you want to leave on Learn and Apply, because Noiseware will actually build a profile after each image is loaded. It'll kind of add a little bit to it and get a little bit more ideas about the noise that's in there and give it an overall better application of it when it's in automatic profile mode. The eye out here, if we click on that, that'll give you profile information. And what that is it basically just tells you what type of noise profile that you're having. In this case, it's automatic. And then we've had 9 images that we've loaded in there. And then the self-learning status itself is telling you that it's learning. And the reason that it's not showing anything in there is, as I always cancel out of this as I've been showing this thing. As it builds up in there, it'll show a percentage of advancement on there. Again, most of these things in here really aren't crucial to understanding how Noiseware works or even using the software. They're there as kind of add-ons for people that really want to delve into the systems and keep a little bit better track of what's going on. And then the values that we have down here are the EXIF data that comes straight out of the camera itself. That's the overall view of Noiseware and how it works. And if you have any questions about any of the things that's been explained in there, you can send an email to george@imagenomic.com, and I'll get back with you and answer your questions just as soon as possible.